The escape pod tumbled through Earth's night sky, leaving a trail of fire behind it. Nari huddled inside, her blue skin glowing faintly as the small craft shook around her. Each violent jolt made her thin body slam against the harness. Her four-fingered hands gripped the safety straps tightly, knuckles pale against her blue skin. When the pod finally hit the ground, everything went black. The crash echoed through the forest, scaring birds from their nests. Steam hissed from the broken metal shell as it cooled in the night air. Time passed before Nari's large eyes fluttered open. Her head throbbed with pain. She reached up with a trembling hand and felt something wet. Purple blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Around her, the pod systems flickered weakly, emergency lights casting eerie shadows. Systems failing, a mechanical voice announced in her native language. Life support damage. Recommend immediate evacuation. Nari tried to move but found her body heavy with weakness. She hadn't eaten properly in days, surviving on emergency rations during her long journey through space. Her people, the Ilani, needed regular nourishment to maintain their energy. Without it, their natural glow faded, and their strength vanished. With a grunt of effort, she pushed against the emergency release. The hatch creaked open, letting in cool night air that smelled of earth and plants. Nari inhaled deeply, her first breath of planet Earth. She pulled herself from the wreckage, her slender blue limbs shaking with the effort. Standing on alien soil, she looked up at unfamiliar stars. This was not how she had imagined her arrival. The emergency launch had been a desperate measure, a last hope when the Raccoon warships appeared in the skies above her homeworld. Nari closed her eyes, fighting back tears as memories flooded back. Her mother's face streaked with tears as she hurried Nari to the pod. Her father's voice, calm despite the chaos, giving her final instructions. The sound of distant explosions as the city fell. "Take this," her mother had said, pressing a small crystal into her palm. "It contains our knowledge, our history. Keep it safe, little one." Then a kiss on her forehead, a push into the pod, and the hatched ceiling shut. The last she saw of her parents was their faces through the viewport as the pod launched. Now she was alone on an unknown world. Nari patted her pocket, making sure the data crystal was still there. It contained everything: agricultural techniques, medical knowledge, historical records, language databases, the condensed wisdom of her people. The forest around her was dense and dark. Strange sounds echoed between trees larger than any on her homeworld. Small creatures scurried through undergrowth, their movements making Nari flinch. She had studied space travel, but never expected to be a refugee. Her people, the Ilani, were peaceful farmers and scholars. The Raccoon invasion had come without warning, their warships darkening the skies without a declaration of hostilities. Her world had little in the way of defenses. They had never needed them before. Now Nari was their legacy, carrying their knowledge to safety. She retrieved a small scanner from the pod, checking her surroundings. The air was breathable, though slightly richer in oxygen than she was used to. The gravity was a little stronger, making her movements more difficult. The temperature was cooler than her homeworld, but not dangerously so. Her stomach cramped painfully, reminding her of her most urgent need. The Ilani could go days without food, but she had already pushed that limit during her journey. Without nourishment, her body would soon shut down completely. The scanner picked up basic life forms nearby, plants that might be edible. But Nari knew better than to experiment with alien flora. What nourished one species might poison another. She needed to find civilization, people who might help her. In the distance, through a gap in the trees, she spotted a faint light. It flickered steadily, unlike the natural glow of her world's plants. It had to be artificial, a sign of intelligent life. With no better option, Nari gathered what she could from the pod. A small medical kit, the remains of her water supply, a basic translator device, though it would be useless until it could analyze this world's languages, and finally, a small knife, not a weapon in design, but it might serve for protection. The pod would need to be hidden. If this world's inhabitants were hostile to outsiders, the technology inside could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Using the last of her strength, Nari activated the pod's camouflage system. The metal shell shimmered, and then seemed to take on the appearance of the surrounding forest floor, visible only as a slight distortion if one knew exactly where to look. That task complete, she turned toward the distant light. Each step was difficult, her legs weak from hunger and the higher gravity. The forest floor was uneven, covered with roots and stones that threatened to trip her. Strange insects buzzed around her, attracted perhaps to her faint bioluminescence. Twice she had to stop and rest, leaning against tree trunks, breathing heavily. On her homeworld, she could run for hours without tiring. Here, a simple walk exhausted her. As she moved deeper into the forest, the light grew brighter. Eventually, she could make out its source, a small structure in a clearing ahead. Unlike the curved, organic architecture of her world, this building was angular, with straight walls and a pointed roof. Light shone from transparent sections that she assumed were windows. Neri paused at the forest's edge, suddenly afraid. What kind of beings lived here? Would they help a stranger from the stars, or would they fear her? The universe held many intelligent species, some kind, some cruel, most simply indifferent to the suffering of others. But she had no choice. Hunger and exhaustion would kill her if she remained in the forest. Gathering her courage, Neri stepped from the trees and approached the strange dwelling, hoping to find mercy rather than fear waiting inside. The night wrapped around Old Man Day's farmhouse like a thick blanket. He sat rocking gently on his wooden porch chair, the same chair he had sat in almost every evening for the past 40 years. His hands cupped a steaming mug of ginseng tea, the warmth seeping into his weathered fingers. At 73, the cold bothered his joints more than it used to. Stars dotted the clear country sky, far from city lights. Dai knew them all by now. He had plenty of time to study them since retiring from the post office 5 years ago. Too much time, really. The silence of the house behind him seemed to grow louder each year since Mia had passed away. Another quiet night, he murmured to himself, a habit he'd developed to hear a voice, any voice, in the stillness. His small farm sat at the edge of dense woods, an hour's drive from the nearest town. The isolation had once appealed to both him and Mia. Now it just reminded him how alone he was. A sudden noise from the tree line made Day sit up straighter. His eyes weren't what they used to be, but his hearing remained sharp. Something was moving through the underbrush at the edge of his property. Probably just a deer, he thought. They often came to nibble at his vegetable garden, despite his best efforts to keep them away. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate than a deer would make. Day reached for the heavy flashlight he kept beside his chair, clicking it on and pointing the beam toward the sound. "Who's there?" he called, his voice stronger than he felt. "This is private property." The light caught movement, then a figure emerged from the trees. Dai squinted, leaning forward. It walked on 2 legs, but moved strangely, swaying with each step like it might fall. As it came closer, Dai could see it was roughly the size of a small woman or large child. Then it collapsed at the bottom of his porch steps. Goodness! Dai set his tea down with a clatter, standing up quickly despite his aching knees. He moved cautiously down the steps, flashlight beam fixed on the fallen figure. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" When he reached the bottom step, Dai pointed his light directly at the figure and froze. The beam illuminated something he couldn't comprehend. Not a woman, not a child, not human at all. The creature lying before him had skin the color of a summer sky, pale blue and faintly luminescent in the darkness. Its frame was delicate, almost fragile, with limbs slightly longer than human proportion. The face turned toward him had overlarge eyes, closed now, above a small nose and mouth that looked almost normal except for their color, the same blue as the rest of it. Day nearly dropped his flashlight. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment he considered rushing back inside, locking the door, and calling the authorities. But who would he call? What would he say? "Hello, there's a blue person on my property." They'd think he'd gone senile. As he stood frozen in indecision, the creature's eyes fluttered open. They were enormous, taking up much of its face, with no whites, just large irises of deep violet. Those eyes fixed on Da, and he saw something that made his fear pause. Fear. The creature was afraid of him. It had curled into itself, arms wrapped protectively around its middle, making itself smaller. A universal posture of vulnerability that Da recognized instantly. Despite its alien appearance, the gesture was unmistakably familiar. "You're just scared, aren't you?" Da said softly, lowering the flashlight beam so it wasn't shining directly in the creature's face. The creature made a small sound, something between a whimper and a word. It tried to push itself up but fell back, clearly weak. As it moved, Da noticed how thin it was, how its blue skin stretched over visible bones. Whatever this being was, it was starving. Something shifted in Da's chest. 3 years ago, when the cancer took Mia, he'd felt himself grow smaller, pulling inward just as this creature was doing now. He recognized suffering when he saw it, no matter what form it took. Slowly, he crouched down, his old knees protesting. He set the flashlight on the ground, pointing away from both of them so they could see each other without harsh light between them. "I won't hurt you," he said, using the gentle voice he'd once used with injured animals on the farm. "Can you understand me at all?" The creature's gaze held his. One four-fingered hand reached out slightly before pulling back, as if unsure. Da noticed a small cut on its forehead, leaking fluid that was darker than human blood, almost purple in the dim light. Its clothes were strange, a single-piece garment made of material he couldn't identify, ripped in several places. When it tried again to rise, Da could see how it trembled with the effort. Whatever journey had brought this being to his farm had clearly taken its toll. "You need food, don't you?" Da asked, pantomiming eating. "Food. Are you hungry?" At the word hungry, the creature's eyes widened slightly. It nodded, a very human gesture that surprised Da. It understood, at least somewhat. Making a decision that would change both their lives, Da slowly extended his hand, palm up, in offering. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward his house. "Let's get you something to eat." For a long moment, the creature stared at his outstretched hand. Then, slowly, it placed its four-fingered blue hand in his. The skin was cool to the touch, smoother than human skin, and Da could feel how it trembled. With gentle care, Da helped the being to its feet. It was lighter than he expected, even with its height, which reached just to his shoulder. As it stood, it swayed dangerously, and Da found himself supporting most of its weight. "Easy now," he murmured, guiding it up the porch steps one at a time. One step at a time. The creature looked back once toward the dark forest, then at Da's weathered face. Something like hope flickered in those strange violet eyes. Inside his small kitchen, Da helped the being into a chair at the table. Under the electric light, its blue skin seemed to shimmer faintly, like the surface of water reflecting sunlight. Da noticed the creature squinting against the brightness, so he dimmed the lights. "What do you eat?" he wondered aloud, opening his refrigerator. "I guess we'll have to figure that out." As Da began setting various foods on the table, an apple, some bread, leftover rice, a bowl of strawberries, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. For the first time since Mia died, the house didn't feel empty. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Da placed a bowl of sliced apples and berries on the table. Nari sat across from him, her blued fingers carefully selecting pieces of fruit. 2 weeks had passed since the night she collapsed on his porch steps, and already a routine had formed between them. "Good," she said, pointing to the red strawberry in her hand. Her voice had a musical quality, with sounds that sometimes vibrated in 2 tones at once. Yes, strawberry, Day replied, speaking slowly and clearly. Strawberry. Strawberry. Nary attempted, her mouth working differently around the sounds. Day smiled and nodded encouragingly. Each day brought new words, new understanding between them. The language barrier was falling brick by brick. The first few days had been the hardest. Day had tried offering Nary different foods, watching carefully for her reactions. Fruits and vegetables she ate eagerly, her color brightening noticeably after eating. But when he'd offered her a piece of grilled fish, she'd become violently ill, her blue skin taking on a sickly gray tone. No meat for you, Da had decided, making a mental note. Vegetarian diet only. Sleep had been another challenge. The first night, Da had made up the spare bedroom, but when he checked on Nary later, he found her sitting upright against the wall, eyes closed, rather than lying in the bed. At first, he thought something was wrong, but her breathing was steady. After gently waking her to check, she had tried to explain through gestures about her world's stronger gravity. You sleep sitting up? Da had asked, mimicking the position. Nary had nodded, patting her back and making pushing motions, trying to explain how her species' spine worked differently. Now, after 2 weeks, they had developed a simple vocabulary of shared words. Da pointed to objects around the kitchen, naming each one, and Nary would repeat after him, her pronunciation improving daily. Cup, Dad said, holding up his coffee mug. Cup, Nary repeated, almost perfectly this time. Water, Da continued, pointing to the liquid inside. Water, she echoed. After breakfast, they moved to the garden behind the house. Dad had been surprised to discover Nary's deep interest in the plants. She would crouch beside the tomato vines for long periods, her large violet eyes studying the structure of leaves and stems with obvious recognition. You know plants? Da had asked one day, miming growth with his hands. Nary had nodded enthusiastically, pointing to herself and then making wide gestures to indicate fields. Ilani, she'd said, tapping her chest. Grow. She'd reached toward the sky, mimicking a plant stretching upward. Day understood then that her people were farmers or gardeners of some kind. That explained her careful attention to his modest vegetable garden. Today, he showed her how to stake the tomato plants, guiding her blue hands as she tied soft cloth strips to support the heavy stems. Her 4 fingers worked differently than his 5, but she was remarkably dexterous, quickly learning the knots he taught her. Good job, Daz said approvingly when she finished a perfect support structure. Nary's face changed in what he'd come to recognize as her version of a smile. Her eyes widened slightly, and the edges of her small mouth curved upward. As days turned into weeks, Day found himself looking forward to their time together. For 3 years since Mia's death, his days had blurred one into another, empty hours filled with pointless routines. Now he had purpose again. Each morning he woke eager to teach Nary new words, to show her more about Earth. By the end of the month, Nary could form basic sentences. Her speech was still halting, with odd inflections, but the progress was remarkable. I helped garden today, she would say, already reaching for the watering can. Morning good day, she would greet him when he came downstairs for breakfast. One particularly exciting day, she had pointed to the calendar on the wall and said, 26 days here. Day had been so proud he clapped his hands, startling her before she understood it was a gesture of approval. That evening, as the sun began to set, they sat together on the porch. It had become their nightly ritual, sharing the quiet as day turned to night. Day in his rocking chair, Nary perched on the wooden step, her blue skin taking on a deeper hue in the fading light. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Nary pointed upward, her finger tracing a path between several bright points of light. Home, she said simply, her large eyes reflecting the starlight. Day nodded, understanding blooming in his heart. You must miss it. Nary looked at him, then made a gesture with her hands, fingers spread wide, then closing quickly as she pulled them apart. Gone now. The meaning was clear even without precise words. Destruction. Dai felt a heaviness settle in his chest. This small blue being hadn't just traveled to Earth. She had fled here. A refugee from some disaster he couldn't imagine. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Neri watched his face, seeming to understand his empathy if not his exact words. After a moment, she raised her hand and pointed to his farmhouse, then to herself, then to Dai, forming a triangle of connection. "Here now," she said. Dai placed his weathered hand gently on her shoulder. "Then this can be your home, for as long as you need." They sat in companionable silence as full darkness fell. When the night grew cool, they moved inside to the small living room, where a lamp cast warm light over Dai's worn furniture. Neri seemed unusually thoughtful. She reached into a hidden pocket in her strange clothing and withdrew something that glittered in her palm, a small crystal, clear but with swirls of color dancing inside it. "Show you," she said, her voice serious. Dai leaned forward, curious. Neri placed the crystal on the coffee table between them. She touched it with one blue finger, and suddenly the air above the crystal filled with light. Dai gasped, pushing back in his chair. Above the crystal floated three-dimensional images, patterns of light forming pictures, diagrams, and symbols he couldn't understand. Neri moved her hand, and the images changed, showing plants unlike any on Earth, growing systems, and complex formulas. "What is this?" Dai whispered, amazed. "Ilani knowledge," Neri said, her expression solemn. "Mother give. Save." As she moved her hands, the images shifted again. Dai saw structures like buildings, medical diagrams of bodies similar to Neri's, and what looked like star maps. He understood then. This small crystal contained the collected wisdom of her people. She had brought it with her, a precious library from a civilization perhaps now lost. "You're keeping it safe," Dai said, understanding the immense responsibility Neri carried. She nodded, her large eyes serious. "Share with you. Help Earth. Help Dai." That night, as Dai lay in bed thinking about all he had seen, he realized that something profound had changed in his life. What had begun as an act of kindness toward a strange visitor had become something more. In helping Neri, he had found meaning again. And now, it seemed, she wanted to help him in return, to share the knowledge of her people. "Mia," he whispered to his late wife's photograph on the nightstand, "you wouldn't believe who's staying in our spare room." For the first time in years, the thought of Mia brought a smile rather than pain. He felt certain she would have approved of their unusual guest. Morning sunlight glinted off three black SUVs as they rolled up the dirt road to Dai's farmhouse. Dust clouds rose behind the vehicles, disturbing the peaceful country scene. The old man had been watering his garden when he first heard the engines. He set down his watering can and squinted at the approaching cars. "Not good," Dai muttered to himself. In his 73 years, he had learned that unmarked black vehicles rarely brought good news. Inside the house, Neri was washing breakfast dishes, her blue hands careful with the old ceramic plates. The sound of car engines made her pause. She moved to the window, peering out carefully from behind the curtain. Her large violet eyes widened with alarm. "Dai," she called, her voice trembling. "People coming." Dai hurried back to the house, his old knees protesting the sudden movement. "I see them. Quick, we must hide you." For weeks, they had practiced what to do if strangers came. Neri nodded and rushed to the kitchen. Dai pulled back the small rug, revealing a trapdoor in the wooden floor. The cellar below was small but had been prepared with a blanket, water, and some fruit. Neri climbed down quickly. "Stay quiet," Dai whispered. "No matter what you hear." "I stay," Neri promised, her blue face serious in the dim light. Dai closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug just as car doors slammed outside. He straightened his shirt, took a deep breath, and opened the front door before they could knock. 5 men stood on his porch. 4 wore identical black suits with subtle earpieces. The fifth, clearly the leader, stepped forward. He was tall with short gray hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Kim?" the man asked, his voice professionally polite but firm. "Yes, that's me," Day replied, keeping his face neutral. The man pulled out an ID card. "Agent Park, National Intelligence Service. We'd like to ask you some questions." Day nodded, not inviting them inside. "What about?" 3 weeks ago, several residents reported seeing unusual lights in the sky near your property, Agent Park said, watching Day's face carefully. The following day, satellite imagery showed what appeared to be impact damage in the forest about a kilometer from here. Day shrugged. "I'm an old man who goes to bed early. I didn't see any lights." One of the other agents was scanning the house with some kind of electronic device. Another was writing notes on a clipboard. The remaining two had spread out, looking around the property with too much interest for Day's comfort. "Since then," Agent Park continued, "there have been reports of strange glowing seen near your farm at night. Would you know anything about that?" Day allowed himself to look confused. "Glowing? Maybe fireflies. We get many in summer." "Mr. Kim," Agent Park's voice hardened slightly, "we have reason to believe an unidentified object crash-landed near your property. We're conducting a routine search of the area. Mind if we look around?" Day stood firmly in the doorway, blocking their view inside. "I'm afraid I do mind. This is private property." Agent Park's eyes narrowed. "Sir, if you're harboring a non-terrestrial entity, that would be a matter of national security. We have authorization to search any premises in this investigation." "Non-terrestrial," Day repeated, forcing a laugh. "You mean like an alien? From space?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss details," Agent Park said. "But I assure you, this is a serious matter." Below the kitchen floor, Neri sat perfectly still, her breathing shallow. She could hear the voices above, the heavy footsteps on the wooden boards. Fear made her bioluminescence dim to almost nothing, a natural defense mechanism of her species. Day thought quickly. He thought of Neri, how she carefully arranged flowers in vases around the house to brighten his days, how she hummed strange, beautiful melodies while they worked in the garden, how just last week, when his arthritis had been particularly painful, she had applied a salve made from her homeworld's knowledge, easing his pain for the first time in years. "The only non-terrestrial entities here are the tomatoes I'm growing," Day said with a forced chuckle. "New variety. Very unusual. Would you like to see them? My garden is my pride these days." The agent with the scanner whispered something to Agent Park, who frowned. "Our equipment is detecting unusual energy readings from inside your house," Park said flatly. "Sir, I must insist." "Your equipment must be broken," Day interrupted. "I live alone. Have for 3 years since my wife passed. No visitors except the mail carrier on Thursdays." 2 agents had now circled the house and returned to the porch. "There's an unusually large garden out back," one reported, "growing some plants I don't recognize." "I told you, new varieties," Day said. "I order seeds from specialty catalogs. It keeps me busy." Agent Park stared hard at Day's face, looking for signs of deception. "Mr. Kim, obstructing a national security investigation is a serious offense. If you're hiding something, or someone, it would be better to cooperate now." Day met his gaze steadily. "I have nothing to hide. But I know my rights. Unless you have a warrant, this conversation is over." The agents exchanged glances. Finally, Park handed Day a business card. "We'll be back, Mr. Kim. In the meantime, if you notice anything unusual, call this number immediately." "Of course," Day said, pocketing the card without looking at it. The agents returned to their vehicles slowly, clearly reluctant to leave. Day stood in his doorway, watching as they drove away, dust settling behind them. Only when they were completely out of sight did he close the door and rush to the kitchen. He pulled back the rug and opened the trapdoor. "They're gone," he whispered. Neri climbed out, her blue skin pale with fear. "Bad men?" she asked. "Government agents," Day explained, helping her up. They're looking for your ship for you. Nari's large eyes filled with tears. I bring danger to Da. I should go. No, Daz said firmly, taking her four-fingered hand in his. But we can't stay here. They'll be back, with papers that let them search the house. We need to leave tonight. Where go? Nari asked, her voice small. Day thought for a moment. My brother had a cabin in the mountains. No one knows about it except me. It's far from here, hard to find. We'll be safe there. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Dai packed clothes, food, and essential supplies. Nari carefully wrapped her data crystal in soft cloth, securing it in a special pocket she had sewn into her earth clothes. As Dai packed, his mind raced. In all his years, he had never broken any laws. He had been a model citizen, a postal worker who retired after 40 years of service. Now he was preparing to hide a being from another world from his own government. But when he looked at Nari carefully placing a photograph of Mia in his suitcase, a gesture of knowing how important it was to him, he knew he was doing the right thing. Night fell. Dad loaded his old truck with their belongings. The vehicle rarely saw use anymore, but he had maintained it well. Nari sat in the passenger seat, a hat pulled low over her face, and a scarf covering the blue skin of her neck. Ready? Dai asked, turning the key. Nari looked back at the farmhouse, the only home she had known on Earth. Ready, she replied softly. As they drove away under cover of darkness, Dai realized that at 73, he was starting a new chapter of his life. Fear mixed with a strange excitement. For the first time since Mia died, he felt truly alive again. We'll be okay, he told Nari, reaching over to pat her hand. I promise. Nari's fingers curled around his. Family protects family, she said in her musical voice, using a phrase he had taught her. Dai felt his heart swell. Yes, somehow in these strange weeks, they had become family. And he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The mountain air was clean and sharp as Dai and Nari arrived at the cabin after 3 days of careful travel. Hidden among tall pine trees, the small wooden structure sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. Dai's brother had built it 30 years ago as a hunting retreat, but had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving it to Da. No one comes here, Dad explained as he unlocked the door. Too remote. No roads, just the hiking trail we used. Nari looked around with wide violet eyes. The cabin was dusty but solid, with large windows that let in mountain light. Solar panels on the roof still worked, providing basic electricity, and a well behind the cabin offered clean water. Safe place, she said, relief clear in her voice. That first night, they sat on the porch watching stars appear above the mountains. Nari pointed to various lights in the sky, naming them in her language, then trying to translate. My people there, she explained, pointing to a cluster of stars. Ilani live on 4 worlds, 3 now, maybe none. Dai listened as she tried to explain about the raccoon invasion, a species that consumed resources from one world before moving to the next. Her people, peaceful farmers with advanced ecological knowledge, had been unprepared for war. Over the following weeks, they made the cabin truly livable. Using knowledge from Nari's data crystal, they transformed the hillside into terraced gardens. Nari showed Dai how to build growing systems that needed little water yet produced incredible yields. Some of the plants were earth varieties, but others were strange hybrids Nari created using seeds stored in her escape pod's emergency kit. One morning, as they harvested purple-tinged vegetables from the 3rd terrace, Dai spotted something streaking across the sky. Look, he pointed. Nari froze, watching the object. Unlike a meteor, it changed direction, clearly controlled. Ilani pod, she whispered. Like mine. They tracked where it landed, the forest valley about 5 kilometers from their cabin. Without hesitation, they gathered supplies and began hiking toward it. What they found was another escape pod, damaged but intact. Inside was Jin, a male Ilani with deeper blue skin than Nari's. He was injured but conscious, his large eyes blinking up at them in disbelief when Nari spoke to him in their language. More survive, Nari told Da, joy making her voice sting. Jin is scientist, plant specialist. They helped Jin back to the cabin. As he recovered, he explained that more pods had been launched from their homeworld. Some might have reached Earth, others were certainly lost. 2 months later, they found Ta, an older female Ilani whose pod had landed in a lake partially damaged. Her specialty was energy systems, and soon she had improved the cabin's solar collection, doubling their power. Then came little Hana, barely more than a child in Ilani terms. Her pod had crashed 6 months after Nari's, and she had been hiding in caves, surviving on wild berries, afraid and alone. When they found her, she was so thin her blue skin had turned nearly gray. I thought all Ilani gone, she had wept as Nari held her. I thought I lost one. Day watched as the small group of survivors formed a tight community. The cabin expanded with careful additions built from local timber. Gardens spread across the mountainside, hidden under special canopies that made them invisible from above. Using knowledge from their data crystals, the Ilani created growing systems that merged earth plants with techniques from their homeworld. For his part, Day taught them about human ways. They learned Korean cooking, earth music, and human customs. In the evenings, he told stories of his life with Mia, of Korean history, of human triumphs and failures. Humans fight too much, Jin observed one night after a history lesson. Like Rakan. Some do, Day agreed, but many are like me, just wanting peace, food, family. You are good human, Ta said, her musical voice gentle. Best human. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and bitter cold. The Ilani struggled with the temperature, their bodies adapted to a warmer world. Dai showed them how to layer clothes, how to insulate the cabin better. Together, they survived the harsh season. One morning, Dai woke unable to breathe properly. His chest felt heavy, each breath painful. By afternoon, he was burning with fever, his lungs filling with fluid. Pneumonia, the old man's enemy. Hospital, Jin suggested, worried by Dai's declining condition. Nari shook her head. Too far, too dangerous. They asked questions. The nearest town was a 4-hour drive in good weather. With snow blocking the mountain roads, it might be impossible to reach. And if they managed to get Dai to a hospital, how would they explain the blue people with him? I will save him, Nari declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. She turned to Jin. Crystal has Ilani medicine knowledge. Help me. Through the night, as Dai's breathing grew more labored, the 4 Ilani worked frantically. Nari and Jin studied medical diagrams projected from their data crystals. Ta constructed a simple device to analyze Dai's blood. Young Hannah gathered plants from their greenhouse, following Nari's instructions precisely. By morning, they had created a pale green liquid. Nari gently lifted Dai's head, his skin hot with fever, his eyes unfocused. Drink, please, she urged, pressing the cup to his lips. Dai swallowed weakly, trusting her completely. For 3 days, he drifted between consciousness and delirium. The Ilani took turns sitting with him, monitoring his temperature, administering more of their medicine when needed. Nari rarely left his side, her blue hand holding his weathered one, her large eyes watching every breath. On the 4th morning, Dai opened his eyes, clear-headed for the first time. Nari was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her blue hand still clutching his. Even in sleep, she hadn't let go. You saved me, he whispered, his voice rough but stronger. Nari's eyes opened immediately. Relief flooded her face as she saw him aware and alert. Family protects family, she replied simply. Spring came again to the mountains. The small settlement had grown to include 3 structures now. The original cabin expanded for Dai and Nari, a second building where Jin and Tai worked on research, and a smaller one where Hannah had her own space, filled with drawings and plants she was studying. Clever camouflage systems, designed by Tai, made the buildings nearly invisible from above. Their gardens, now extensive, were hidden under similar technology. Any aircraft passing overhead would see only untouched mountain forest. Day sat on the porch of the main cabin, watching as Neri taught Hana about Earth seasons. The young Ilani was a quick learner, her natural curiosity making her an eager student. Jin worked nearby, carefully grafting an earth plant to one from their homeworld. "Look what we grew," Hana called suddenly, running toward Da with excitement. In her blue hands was a strange flower, star-shaped with petals that shifted from deep blue to purple as they caught the light. "Grandfather, first Earth Ilani flower," she exclaimed, using the title she had given Dai months ago. Day took the bloom carefully, amazed by its beauty. From his chair, he could see the whole settlement. The gardens, the buildings, the 4 blue figures going about their work. 2 years ago, he had been alone, a widower counting empty days in an empty house. Now, against all odds, he had found a family among the stars. "It's beautiful," he said, looking at the impossible flower and then at the child's shining face. "Just like all of you." Nari joined them on the porch, sitting beside Dad's chair. "We received signal yesterday," she said quietly. 3 more pods approaching Earth. More survivors. Dad looked at her in surprise, then smiled. Their family would grow larger. There would be more work, more challenges, more joy. "We'll make room," he said simply. "There's always room for family." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Dad looked at his strange, wonderful family. Once, he had thought his life was ending. Instead, he had found himself at the beginning of something extraordinary, a bridge between worlds.